is online. He should not be here right now.
Luke, our meeting's not till 7.
Our meeting's at 7, Luke.
Sorry.
I've done it.
Okay,
Go enjoy an hour.
I clicked the wrong Zoom link.
okay. All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Right. Okay, we're ready to roll. Good evening. This meeting of the Coventry Town Council will come to order at 6 p.m. Roll call, Ms. Ludwig,
Here.
Mrs. Shockley,
Here.
Mr. LeBlanc.
Here.
Mrs. Dixon here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Ludwig will lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. You may be seated. May I have a motion to recess into executive session per Rhode Island General Law 42465A1 for the following: discussion of job performance, character, physical, or mental health of the person or persons, specifically for the council to interview candidates for the following boards: Pawtuxet River Authority, Friends of Human Services, and Planning Commission. Do I have a motion?
Make a motion.
Thank you, Kim. Do I
I'll
have
second the motion.
Thank you, Jen. Any discussion? All right. Roll call, Ms. Ludwig,
Yes.
Mr. Shockley,
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc,
Yes.
Mrs. Dixon, 4 yeas, no nays. The motion is approved. Members of the council, please access the Zoom link for the executive session. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Sands. Mhm.
That's when he was available. He's taken that day off anyway. Yeah, he wanted to come in at 7:30, but I said I'm meeting with.
Ben, you're unmuted.
8:30, and I didn't want to have to cut it short.
Hey, Craig.
Hey, Dave.
How you doing?
Good.
Good evening.
Even Miss Merchant.
It's Marshawn.
Oh, Marshawn.
I've
Excuse
been
me.
called worse.
Sorry.
That's all
Reading
right.
glasses. Reading glasses are tough. Mr. Sands here? Yeah.
I am.
Mr. Sands, where are you?
Mr.
You and I have some mutual friends there, Mr. Sands.
We should talk about it offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great to have you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Mrs. Coolian. Hey, Donna.
Dave, how
How
you
you
doing?
doing, Donna? Good. How you doing, Donna?
I'm very well, thanks.
Nice to see you. How's everybody?
Everyone's well. How about you?
Same here. How was Florida?
It was beautiful.
Oh, nice, nice. It'll be cool, Donna,
What,
if Justin Haywood and John Lodge
got together?
got together, like the Blue Jay, like when they were with
Like
the
when they were
Blue
Blue Jays, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, you never know.
You don't know. I mean, they could get other musicians.
Hmm. Well, John Lodge tours all the time.
Yes. So does Justin.
Yeah. Mhm.
Mr. Casey told me the weather was great down in Florida. He said it was really nice. He's at Fort Myers.
Yeah, it was, actually, it was more, we were there to visit family, so,
Yeah.
it was more for that than anything.
How's Rick's dad doing?
He's doing well, doing well.
Your family?
My family's well also. My
That's good.
sisters are there.
Nice. Nice. We were looking at one place in a few years down the line called Margaritaville in Daytona.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't that be
My
cool?
my sister's not too far from there. She lives in DeLand. It's where
Oh,
my son
okay.
went to college.
Sure. That would be really cool. Where do you live? Where do you live in Florida? I live in Margaritaville.
Yeah.
Oh. How the boys?
Yeah, well,
That's
what
good.
about yours? When's the wedding?
Oh, Donna, I think he eloped. He talks
No
about,
way.
yeah, he talks talks about her like it's his wife now. He uses the phrase wife, my wife and I. And
Well, you never know. Maybe he
I don't
didn't.
know. Yeah, I know. Maybe he didn't. We're gonna set up something. They want a wedding on the beach in Newport. So
Oh, that's nice.
we'll see. Yeah. Her dad came up and helped with the demolition of the house that they were working on in Bristol
Oh, wow.
in
That's nice.
1796. Yeah. Yeah. You know, he's very good when it comes to construction. Jim Watson's a great guy, really good guy.
That's good.
You know.
Hi, Ms. Mills. Hi, Mr. Masha.
Hello, hello, Mr. James.
Hello, Mr. LeBlanc.
Let's see, we all have everyone here.
Okay.
Kim and Jen, we're waiting for Jen.
Hi, Jamie. Hi, Kim.
Hello, everyone. We're just waiting for one member of the council.
Who's that? Hillary?
No,
Not yet.
Not yet.
They got to finish voting for her.
Don't worry, they will.
I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. We were interviewing candidates for different boards and commissions, and this was one evening in which every technical problem happened. And so we were at a good speed doing what we needed to do, but we couldn't connect. People couldn't hear us. People couldn't see us. So it's just one of those unusual nights and one that's not common for us at all. So we apologize for that. We'll just have one more member of our council will be with us, I would say, in about 1 minute.
Jen's on.
Oh, excellent. Okay. All right. The public meeting of the Coventry Town Council is now resumed at 7:10. Do I have a motion from a member of the council to adjourn from the executive session?
I'll make that motion.
Oh,
I'll
I'll
second.
second it.
Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Jen. Any discussion? Okay, please raise your hand if you're in favor of adjourning from the executive session. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 yeas, no nays. 4 to 0. Thank you. Members of the council and members of the public, the council met in executive session per Rhode Island General Law 42465A1 for the following: discussion of job performance, character, physical, or mental health of a person or persons, specifically for the council to interview candidates for the following boards: Pawtuxet River Authority, Friends of Human Services Commission, and the Planning Commission. We discussed the candidates for each board, and we did not reach consensus. We will not be making any appointments this evening. May I have a motion to seal the minutes of the executive session?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Shockley.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please raise your hand if you're in favor of sealing the minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 yeas, no nays. Thank you. Members of the public, welcome, and a warm welcome to members of the Coventry Public Schools, the school committee, the superintendent of schools, Mr. Craig Levis, chairperson Catherine Patno, finance director Harold Sands, assistant superintendent Don Coward, and we have Mr. Luke Murray with us this evening, Mr. James Pearson, and Mr. Florio. Thank you. We have a full house. Also, welcome to our finance director, Ms. Lisa Mills, and our town manager, Mr. Benjamin Marchant. And we also have Ms. Donna Kalunian. So thank you for joining us this evening. Mrs. Patno, would you please open your meeting?
Yes, Madam President, thank you. I would like to open the Coventry School Committee meeting. And if we could have a roll call, Mr. Levis, thank you.
Mrs. Kathy Patno,
Here.
Mr. Dave Florio,
We see him. Mr. Florio, you're on mute. But you can raise your hand. I think we know you're here.
Yeah, I'm Craig Levis too.
Mrs. Donna Kalunian,
Here.
Mr. James Pearson,
Here.
and Mr. Luke Murray.
Here.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Patno. Agenda item C2 is the approval of our minutes for February 17th, 2021. We received these minutes late yesterday, some of us early this morning, and I'm going to make a recommendation that we postpone the approval of these minutes. May I have a motion to postpone until the first meeting in May?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Ms. Ludwig. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mrs. Shockley. Any discussion? Okay. Please raise your hand if you're in favor of postponing the minutes for February 17th to the first meeting in May. Thank you. 4 yeas, no nays. The motion passes. Agenda item D1, appointment to members of boards and commissions. I need a motion to postpone the appointment to for any members to any of these boards. May I have a motion to postpone the appointments to the Pawtuxet River Authority, the Friends of Human Services, and the Planning Commission?
I'll
I'll make a motion. I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Shockley. Thank you, Ms. Ludwig. Any discussion? Please raise your hand if you're in favor of postponing the appointments. 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. 4 yeas, no nays. Agenda item E1, this is the town council work session, a joint meeting with the school committee and the town council. This will be a presentation and discussion of the Coventry Public School budget for fiscal year 2021 to 2022. Mr. Levis, welcome. Are you presenting this evening? Are you starting us off?
Yes, I'm going to present, but I'm also, I have Assistant Superintendent, Mr. Coward, and our recently hired, fairly new Finance Director of Finance, Mr. Harold Sands. So they will both interject, I'm sure, several times So I appreciate the opportunity to present to the council. Hopefully any questions that you have, we can answer. If not, we'll definitely get you the answers. I had a nice meeting with Mr. Marchand yesterday. Again, I want to welcome him to Coventry, and I look forward to having a partnership with him and Ms. Mills. And, look forward to working with the school committee and the council to get our budget approved. That approval process is long overdue, and we look forward to working with you. Before I get started, I do want to just take an opportunity. I hope you're aware that this past Monday, we brought all of our students back. Any student that wanted to return to school had the opportunity. And, it was 13 months ago when we took a hiatus, wasn't sure how long that was going to be. And, this process this summer, reflecting on what we had been through in terms of just distance learning and having to put together a reentry plan. And I just want to take a quick moment just to thank, our students, our parents, our educators, support staff, our bus drivers and monitors, food service, our administrators, and our school committee. Many of my colleagues this has been a political process, keeping schools open, closing, and I've said this several times, but I'd be remiss if I didn't say it again, that I truly, sincerely appreciate their support, allowing us to do what we needed to do. And there are many other districts that we were compared to who still not have a plan to get all their students back. So I just want to thank our community for the support. This has been by no means easy. I'm sure we have difficult roads ahead, but I wanted to take the opportunity tonight to thank our community for their support. And like I said, we brought everybody back Monday. I'm sure we'll have some challenges ahead the next 5 or 6 weeks, but I can't imagine being with a more competent team that has such willingness to do whatever it's taken to get us this far. So I just wanted to say thank you. I will pull up my slides, and Dr. Dixon, I don't know how you want to do this, if you want to stop at every slide or if we can go through the presentation and then ask questions, whatever your pleasure is.
Well, it's your presentation, so I feel that you can be the guide. And I think that if there are members of the council who would like to ask questions as we go along, we can certainly entertain those questions, because the slide set is very detailed, very comprehensive, and it might be better to just ask questions as we go along. If we find that that's too disruptive, we can change the pattern. So why don't we just get started, Mr. Levis?
Fantastic. So again, this is a budget that was approved by the school committee on April 15th. And obviously it's a work in progress. We also will be talking about a COVID budget that has been approved, portions of the COVID budget by the school committee. And I want to thank them. Started last year with Ms. Mangiarelli, that we had determined that we were going to put forward a budget that addressed the needs of all of our students. And we know we were hit with a pandemic, but we continued to put forward what we believe we need to address the needs of our students. And we continue to do that. So this is just an overview of the budget discussion. We're going to talk about our priorities. We're going to present a history of local appropriations of Coventry Public Schools. I think it's important. There's been, I've made comments before, and it's important to understand just the funding history of how we got to where we're at when we talk about having structural deficits. This didn't just happen overnight, but the positive is that we plan on attacking that. Fortunately, with COVID funds, we could utilize some of that and make some, I heard last night in terms of how the town will have, and again, I'm paraphrasing, $2.3 million potentially of surplus because of CARES Act money. We're going to be able to use our money, hopefully strategically, so that we won't need to continue to ask for a significant amount from the community and the taxpayers. We're going to talk an overview of our actuals of this current budget as of 3/31/2021. We haven't presented that to the school committee. We will be presenting that to the school committee this Thursday night, and then we'll be sharing that detailed, I believe it's 130 some odd pages of budget documents. We'll share that with the town manager, the town finance director, and the town council. We'll talk about our use of fund balance, the proposed 22 budget, including revenues, some of the changes that we've made recently, the last school committee meeting on the budget. We're going to talk about the school department maintenance requirement. We know that's important. Obviously, it's important because we need to reinvest in our schools, but especially what transpired this year where none of us were aware of what was going to happen when the state took, I think it was $433 of housing aid that was going to go to the town, and they put it in an account for the schools to use. We'll talk about our COVID budget. We're going to highlight some of the staffing, both staffing that we need to, that we're going to hire that'll have to go in our local budget, but also staffing we're going to hire using our COVID funds for interventions and student support. Then we'll give a budget summary. And then we want to focus on a couple areas that we've been asked to talk about. The curriculum work, despite the challenges we face being level funded during the pandemic, we still worked hard to develop a curriculum, especially around this year, English language arts. We're working on our math curriculum. And we'll talk a little bit about the work that's continuing to take place. And then finally, our story. Why should people support this budget? Why should people support, Coventry Public Schools? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So our budget priorities. First, I want to show you on the right, it's called the Vision of the Graduate. This is something that was developed during our NEASC accreditation process. I brought this up to Dr. Dixon, and I spoke to Mr. Marchand about this. I'm hoping to have one of the next few council meetings have some of our high school educators that really drove the Vision of the Graduate. I want them to come and present to the council, because I think this is something this is what's driving education in Coventry right now. And I believe, Dr. Dixon, you were on the committee when we approved this. And I think it's important because this will set the table not only for our budget, but also moving forward for our strategic planning. This budget addresses the student academic and social emotional needs post-pandemic. We're going to continue to expand learning opportunities for our students. We need to maintain the current level of services. Coming out of the pandemic, we always hear this phrase, learning loss. We need to look at the social, emotional, and the academic needs and make sure that we have the support, the personnel to provide those services. We're going to continue to develop the high quality, robust curricula. We'll talk about that, pre-K to 12 plus. We have transition. We have students to the age of 22 that are still part of our school system. We're going to talk about targeted professional development for all staff. Our staff are our greatest resource. We've never experienced that more than during this pandemic. We can't just give them materials and give them direction. We need to provide them with targeted support. Not everybody needs the same professional development. We have a professional development team that is represented by our educators and also by administration. Mr. Coward helps facilitate that. And we really look at what the individual needs of our educators and our staff, our support staff, our custodians. There was training that needed to take place in terms of sanitation, disinfecting. So we need to look at all of our staff. That's important. We're going to talk about the Rhode Island General Law 16-7-23. It's that maintenance requirement. This budget of FY22 needs to have 2.5% of our operations needs to be allocated toward maintenance. So we're going to discuss how we're going to get there. And then looking at how we plan on using our federal COVID funds to provide the interventions and address the structural deficit. We've been using our funds appropriately to fill in any gaps. We're going to talk about how we've used our fund balance to support not only FY21, but we need to continue to use that in FY22. Is that ideal? No, but that's the situation we're forced to be in. So this is an interesting graph. And I'm going to focus on the school side. This isn't to say, look at the difference between the schools and the town, but I think it's important. I recognize, and this was clear to me when I first came to Coventry, that the town has expenses that the school doesn't. You're paying for different pensions. You're actually contributing to the SRP pension. There's debt service that the town carries. But I think what's important is to look at the consumer price index, and that's basically the rate of inflation. So if you go back to 2009, 2010, and you look at, this is the budget increases from the real estate taxes or the tax revenue that's been allocated to the school department. So you can see that there's several years where we were level funded or close to level funded. And this doesn't include the current, the 2021 year where we were level funded. And so if you look at this over time and you look at where we are in the consumer price index and you look at the average increase, the school department budget increase over these 11 years was approximately 1%. So when we talk about our needs now, there was a time when we've shared this, and Ms. Mandrielli had shared this slide early in this process where we talked about state revenues versus local appropriations. And when we were in that period of time for 6 years where we received an increase in state aid because the state had determined that we had been underfunded, they'd indicated to the town to continue to fund the schools appropriately. And unfortunately, it appears that there was a period of time where that didn't take place because the thought process was, well, you're getting additional money from the state. But I think this is important because we have a new council. I know we don't want to go deep in the past, we want to move forward, but it's important to understand when we talk about asking for an increase like we're asking this year, this didn't just happen overnight. And so I think this is an important slide. We have the backup numbers, but we felt it's too confusing. But again, I want you to focus on the school part and look at the history over time. So this is an overview. Later on in the presentation, we have a summary budget slide, and you'll see some of these numbers. I know we're not providing you with the details, but my responsibility, and I said this before, I did this. I know when Mr. LeBlanc had asked me for details around the staffing, and my responsibility is to the school committee, and I have a right to have things approved and presented to them first. Dr. Dixon, rightfully so, wanted to fit another meeting in, but this meeting is prior to our school committee meeting, which takes place Thursday. So these are just highlights of our budget to actuals. And I want to thank Ms. Mills for, helping us, recognize that this is important to do. We're in the same process. We're transitioning through our finance directors. And again, we didn't really have our budget for FY21. I mean, we're going off of a level funded budget. We still weren't sure about state aid. We're still, concerned about some of the revenues that are coming in. So we think that our revenue and expenses right now, this is as of March 31st, are pretty accurate. And you'll see that when we get back into the summary budget. Our local LEA tuitions, these are tuitions that other districts pay to us for our students coming to Coventry, typically the Career Tech Center. They're lagging about a month. With a pandemic, they may be lagging a little bit more. Our Medicaid revenue, we're eligible to receive Medicaid funds for students that are eligible, typically students that have an IEP. It doesn't impact their ability to access other services, but we're able to recoup funds for medical services that we provide. It could be like speech and language, could be assisting with daily living skills, but those revenues are lagging behind. Our salaries and benefits are running as expected. Purchase services. So purchase services are typically for us transportation, they're our food service, they are our tuitions, and they're also special education related services. We have therapists, contracted agencies that come in and provide supports. And those are our special ed service, our purchase services. We expect them to increase for the last quarter because of our in-person learning. Our potential increase in personnel costs, we were fortunate that our unions, both of our unions worked with us in terms of the pandemic and our needs for coverage. We have students eating in the classroom. So typically we supervise students in a cafeteria. We needed students couldn't congregate in the morning. They couldn't go into a large space and congregate or just congregate outside. We need people in the classroom. So we worked with our unions and they compromised greatly to support us so that we could have flexibility with staffing. A lot of that was taken away from what they would have been doing on Monday. Because we are open 5 days a week now, we need to expand for coverage. Most of that is with our SRP staff, our teaching assistants, our supervisory assistants. And so we expect some additional expenses because of the need for additional coverage to be open 5 days a week. And again, I want to thank them for their support. We couldn't have done this without their flexibility. Our furniture and equipment, it continues to run low. And as our technology-related hardware expenses were shifted to the CARES Act funds. So we took one-time expenditures that we could and shifted those to the CARES fund. We heard you discuss that. I heard you discuss that last night in your conversations. And then finally, the use of Sr2 funds. Those are the funds that were allocated by President Trump. We have to utilize those to address any potential deficit based on COVID. And this was discussed when we went forward with that resolution, the resolution that you had approved. We need to utilize our COVID funds first for any COVID expenditures. And again, there'll be numbers associated with this when we get to our summary page, and we will share with you the detailed information. I believe it's about 130 some odd pages that we will share with you, line items, after our meeting Thursday night. Sorry. So this is our projected revenue. Our state aid, we've talked about. We have allocated the numbers that RIDE had posted. I think it was March 11th. It was $600,000 more than we had expected. It's still a reduction of about $300,000 from last year. We had a cut of about $900 some odd thousand for state aid from FY21 to FY22. But, we're being told that we should count on that fund, but until the governor's budget is approved, that's still an area of where we could see cuts in our state aid going into FY22. We're asking for over $1,800,000 in local appropriations from level funded FY21 appropriations. We've reduced all our one-time expenditures from FY 2021. We're using our surplus for food service. I think you'll see that we have an expected $200,000 deficit in FY 21. We are expecting the same in our food service, that we will be using some of our fund balance and also the remainder, which is about $500,000 to help reduce the budget gap. This will leave us with close to zero reserves fiscal year start. There were some questions or potential questions. I'm not sure if they were. I didn't really, I was called by our attorney Friday night, and there seemed to be some conversation going on with Mr. Gorham and Mr. Anderson. But my takeaway from it was concerned that maybe the schools shouldn't have a fund balance and that fund balance should go back to the town. I just want to be clear that in the regulation 16-7-23D, it talks about that any fund balance that is from either state or local aid stays with the schools, and it's the school's responsibility to determine how those funds would be used for any prior year. So just in case there was some questions about that, you can check it out in 16-7-23D. So finally, we're using stimulus COVID funds to offset budget gap of $813,000. I believe the last budget we presented, we talked about using that as revenue, but you're going to see we've pulled those services in this budget. We pulled them out. We're using COVID funds just to cover those expenditures. I think this is important. I've heard the town, and I think it's important. I know Mr. McGee, Mr. Kevin McGee, Mr. Robillard have written significant grants. I know Ms. Blumenthal, I know the police department. So the schools also have received over the last less than 2 years, we've received about $2 million in competitive grants. We have a state pre-K grant. We're one of 2 school districts to receive it, over $1 million for 3 years. It allows us to have 2 state pre-Ks at no cost to our community residents. They have, I believe, 20 students in each pre-K, and that funds those pre-K, pre-kindergarten programs for 3 years. And we're very fortunate, again, to have that. I'm sure you're aware, if you haven't had a presentation, I'm sure Mr. Robillard will be doing one, that he and I wrote a grant to the Renown Foundation We received over $450,000 for 3 years to help Coventry, not just the public schools, but the community of Coventry become trauma informed. And, you know, I can't think of a time in my life where everybody I know has experienced trauma than going through this pandemic. So it's very timely. We've been doing some work. I know we work with Family Service Rhode Island. They did provided a training to some of the personnel on the municipal side just, I think, a couple of weeks ago. That's something that we're going to have those funds for another couple of years. And that's a great support to our community. We'll be training all of our youth sports coaches, all of our teachers, our support staff. We want to train the municipal employees, and we plan on holding a training for the school committee and the town council around trauma, how trauma impacts all of us and what we can do to become a trauma-informed community. One of the areas, and we'll talk a little bit later on tonight about, is our curriculum. You know, we had purchased several years ago curriculum in math and in English language arts and spent a significant amount of money. And at the time, we felt that these were high quality curriculums. Recently, with the Common Core standards being adopted by most of the country, there was a crosswalk done, the standards to these curriculums, and there was a nonprofit organization called Ed Reports that looked at curriculum around the country and identified, you know, low quality versus high quality curriculums. The curriculums that we had purchased, and many other districts purchased them, were not determined to be high quality curriculum. You know, curriculum is expensive. We were very fortunate. So we had a team that was comprised of our educators, administrators, Mr. Cowart, and they looked at the curriculum that we had. And more importantly, they looked at what high quality curriculum exists and helped make decisions around adopting curriculum. And we wrote a grant, because curriculum, again, is expensive. We wrote a grant for an English language arts curriculum, and we received, it was a competitive grant through the state, we received close to $600,000 to purchase a secondary curriculum and a pre-K curriculum. That allows us to use our own funds to purchase the elementary curriculum. So again, we received these funds, and we've been able to move forward and identify that curriculum. Just recently, there was a presentation made. I was approached by the leadership at CCAP, and they had an opportunity to receive federal funding for a health clinic. You're aware that CCAP has on MacArthur Boulevard, they have their health center that has mental health, behavioral health, dental, and medical. They approached me and said, we'd love to be able to write for a clinic that would just supplement what we do, support our students and even our staff at Coventry High School. So I want to thank the school committee, thank Ms. Maycumber. There was a presentation done on the 15th. We agreed to sign a letter of support, and they have sent in the application. So we could have a health clinic that's federally funded at our high school that would service our students. So I think that's a wonderful asset, again, for the community. But these are things that we've been doing to support the work that's being done in Coventry, just like you do on the municipal side. So we talked about fund balance. I mentioned the regulation that allows us to do this. Again, using fund balance for operations is not ideal, but it's necessary, especially when we were level funded, and we had consistently said. I remember having a conversation with Mr. LeBlanc about one thing is we were consistent about our ask throughout the process, and we never wavered. And I thank the school committee and Ms. Mangiarelli for saying in our administrative team and for saying this is what we need, and we continue to put forward. That's our charge. That's our responsibility. So we had $2,200,000 of fund balance after FY20. And we've had to use in FY21, we expect to use over $1.5 million, $1.3 million for operations, $200,000 for food service. The second caveat bullet is just put in there because we do have a resolution from the town, but the caveat is we have to exhaust all of our federal funds before we can go to the town to ask for any COVID. I don't plan on doing that, but I did want to put this in here just to acknowledge the fact that we do have the resolution, and we do have an ability, if we needed to go and demonstrate our need to the town if we couldn't cover our expenses, but I fully plan that we will. And then finally, our current budget forecast for FY22 again, show a one-time lunch operations, lunch and operations shortfall of approximately $7,000 that we'll use. And that will use up our fund balance. So this was approved on the 15th. We removed all COVID-related line items to a separate COVID budget. So therefore, we changed the revenue by $813,000. That $813,000 is going to be COVID funds that we pulled into the budget. It's semantics, but we've pulled those items out and we funded them solely through our COVID budget, which we'll talk about in a little bit. The maintenance cost under the regulation, which is the same regulation, 16-7-23, where it talks about 3%, but it's graduated, FY21. Our maintenance has to be 2% of our operations budget. And in FY22, it has to be 2.5. And obviously in FY23 and beyond, it goes to 3%. Mr. Sands will talk about this when we get into the next slide, which is on maintenance. But we've reduced that in this budget by about $615,000. It doesn't mean that we're not going to meet that requirement. Our plan is to meet the 2.5% requirement. And we'll go through how we plan on meeting that requirement, both FY21 and FY22. We don't have firm numbers on state aid and in the tuitions. We're hoping the state aid comes in as projected. My understanding is that the state is going to use the COVID funds to fill their budget gaps, and they want to. I listened to the governor talk about he doesn't plan on reducing any services to any of the state agencies or to the schools, but until it's approved, it's yet to be seen. And then finally, again, highlighting our purchase services, which are transportation, our bus contract, and our out-of-district statewide transportation. If you remember, we had renegotiated with the statewide transportation to reduce our expenditures, and that's why we're able to put back our athletic programs, our extracurricular programs that we thought could run this year. It wasn't because we had a windfall in any revenue, but we were able to shift expenditures. So those are large items between our in-district transportation and our out-of-district. Our food service, again, we've been running a deficit. We're trying to, Sodexo's been great working with us. We have a plan this summer to provide meals to as many students as possible, and the reimbursement versus how much it costs to put those meals together should help us still attack that deficit that we have. Our tuition to other schools and our special education services that we purchase, behavioral support, sometimes occupational therapy, vision services, that's been in the news a lot lately. Those are all part of our purchase services. So Mr. Sands, I don't want to take away any of your thunder, but do you mind going through this slide very quickly?
Absolutely. Mr. Levis, thank you. The maintenance costs, RIGL 16720-23 has been used repeatedly in our budget talks. The maintenance costs for 2021 are based on the 2% of the budget, which was $1.5 million approximately. This is planned to be paid by bond interest, that salaries and benefits of trade workers, school maintenance expenditures, which we've all calculated here, capital funds allocated from the town to complete the HVAC at the high school for $200,000. And then you could see the rest there. The supplemental impact education aid was part of the CARES Act, and we plan to spend $315,000 on the ERV to increase airflow within the schools. And stage 2 architecture and engineering, Studio J at $187,000. This will leave no balance for 2021 at this point, and we do not expect to have a balance on our for the rest of the year. Maintenance costs for 2022 are based on a 2.5 of the budget. The proposed budget at at present, which is $1.9 million. Same goes for the bond interest. Salaries and benefits will go up as they increase, the workers increase during this period coming up. Maintenance expenditures are $250,000. COVID budget. What we mean by the COVID budget is there were capital improvements within the COVID budget that we showed to both the town council and the school committee. And in those that there were 2 or 3 HVAC areas that we could use COVID money to actually do some capital improvements. So we're going to be using the COVID budget to do that, as well as also capital improvements that may come through from previous 2021. We were expecting some of those capital improvements to go into 22, and so we've put that there. The housing aid reimbursement of $193,000 would be based off of capital improvements that we did in 2021. Thank you.
So the bottom line is we expect to meet those 2% and 2.5%. 2% this year, 2.5%. But we need to continue to monitor that. We need to work closely with Mr. Marchand and Ms. Mills to make sure that we are. The last thing any of us want is to find out at the end of the year we haven't met those, and then that money gets taken. For whatever reason, I know it didn't seem to be a big hit to the town this year, but I would assume that any money that's taken away, that's projected as revenue that's taken away is going to be significant to either one of us. We will continue to work with the town on that. So the COVID budget, basically, we had talked about that. There were questions before when we had met. We didn't have concrete numbers. We still don't have a process to apply for it. So we've been given, a pretty concrete number for President Trump's funding. But we were given numbers for the American Recovery Plan, but also told that these were could be adjusted. And so we've been able to go to the school committee, and this is what we've had approved, and we continue to go back to them as other items come and get approval. I wasn't at the school committee meeting last week, but I did watch it afterwards, and there was a very comprehensive conversation about how we should utilize COVID funds. The last thing we want to do is just use it to maintain the level of support. We'd love to use it to be innovative, but our reality is, and as council knows, we need to use it to make sure that we fill any budget gaps that we have. And that's one of the areas that's approved. I shared the documents with the federal guidelines. We can use these funds to maintain the level of services. But so the 3 areas that we're using it, obviously, we talked about the Chromebooks, that those Chromebooks are going to save us approximately close to $400,000 for the next 3 years. That would have been in our operations. So we talk about attacking the structural deficit. That's one way that we're able to do it. We're going to use it to support additional personnel. We need to make sure that our focus is on students, that it's targeted focus, that we focus on not just academic achievement, but also the social emotional component. We have reading teachers, math interventionists, some special education support staff. It's about 2.1 million that we're using out of the CARES Act. Out of the COVID funds, SR2, to support targeted interventions for students. And finally, a summer program. I know Ms. Blumenthal talked about it. There were questions that were asked last night. We've met. I want to thank Mr. Marchand for supporting Ms. Blumenthal prior to your last meeting where money was allocated back to her. And the funding source we're going to have for a summer program would have just come from the school department, because we know how valuable, and I know, Ms. Shockley, you talked about your children, how valuable those programs are to our community, to residents. And we want to make sure that we partner with our agencies. Mr. Robillard works with us closely, and we're also working with the Y to provide opportunities for summer programming for our students for both social, emotional, and academic. We've been working with Brown University, the Annenberg Institute, around high density tutoring. I think I mentioned that before. targeted tutoring that's connected to connected to the curriculum in both the areas of math, reading and writing. Done properly, it's 15 to 20 times more effective than just, remedial tutoring. So we've been doing a lot of work with Brown and other districts, and we plan on implementing that as a district. We had a lot of success with structured literacy. It's a way of teaching reading, a very prescribed program. And we have people who are experts within our school. Dr. Sharkhart helped spearhead that with our special ed department. Mr. Coward was also part. We had a lot of success last year with students that weren't just students with disabilities, but struggling learners, readers, and they made incredible gains last year. So we want to expand that. And so we allocated, and the committee approved approximately $600,000 to have this targeted support for students this summer. So those are the three areas that we've approved. I say the school committee has approved the use of our COVID funds to support our students in our families. Because I think I said that before, the fact that as a parent, and I don't have younger children, but I hear this all the time, parents just want their kids to be kids. And by us providing opportunity for students to work, to be engaged with their peers in some structured activity, it's going to benefit our families too. There's nothing I can't imagine as a parent wanting to see their kids just be kids this summer. And so we think we're going to do our part to offer many, many students opportunities this summer through the COVID funds. I'm going to ask Mr. Coward to jump in here, if you don't mind, and go through the staffing. There is a change from, I believe in the sheet that the slide presentation I had shared previously with you. I believe one of these positions projected local was part-time. It might have been the part-time reading support, but it should have been full-time. So we corrected it on this. But Mr. Coward, do you mind jumping in?
Sure. So we went through a process with each department and each school administration team to talk about staffing needs for next year. And each school brought forward things that they identified as being important. And we had them then rank their requests by what was the most urgent down to what was a nice to have, but not necessarily a have to have. And we had those conversations and we kind of teased out where people were at. And what we did is then looked at those different positions and saw where those positions could potentially land in terms of budgeting. A number of the positions that we identified as needing for next year really fell under what we called the projected COVID budget positions. And those kind of are aligned to what Mr. Levis just talked about earlier about intervention support for students, for mathematics and reading especially. We talked about building-based substitutes. It's been discussed numerous times at school committee meetings and maybe even town council meetings, but there's a shortage of substitutes, and it's actually very difficult for us to get coverage for classrooms. And we're constantly moving teachers in and out of covers to try to keep all the classrooms staffed. We've had some limited success, and we're hoping to build upon it, having building subs assigned to each building. And those building subs stay in those buildings and are available to the principals to cover classrooms as needed. And then to do a few other daily responsibilities and duties that come up. And then we also had some needs to support students with speech and language and occupational therapy. On the top part of this sheet were things that we identified that would land in the local budget. Most of the positions that are here were either positions that were existing before and cut down, or positions that were eliminated that we are bringing back. And I'll give you an example. So at Feinstein Middle School, at one point, they had 3 reading interventionists for a school of 1,100 kids, which many would argue is still not enough. Currently, they have 1 for 1,300 kids. And, especially in a time right now where there's so much learning loss and kids struggling coming off of distance learning, we find that that's not adequate. Another example at Feinstein was they used to have a math interventionist. Right now they don't have one. So we want to bring that back. So what we did at the top part of this is identified some positions that were either cut and we want to bring them back whole, or positions that were eliminated that we need to put back into the local budget. And the reason why they sit in the local budget is because they cannot be positions that after 1 year of COVID funding, then are forced to disappear because of a structural deficit. These are positions that have to be in place. The next thing I wanted to mention, since I'm talking about Feinstein, is about a new schedule that's being implemented next year. We worked very hard with the school administration team, a number of teachers in the building, and then with our union friends to come up with a schedule that met the needs of the students first and foremost, but also met the needs and contractual obligations for teachers and what we need to do with curriculum, because a lot of the new curriculum materials and programs that we're looking at have requirements for instructional minutes that we did not have built into the current schedule. So this will help us address those needs. The rest of the positions, like guidance is at a part-time guidance position at the high school. When we had an EAS visit and they came and they looked at the number of students each guidance counselor is personally responsible for, we are way out of alignment compared to what they recommend. So you'll see a lot of part-time positions. Some of them are 0.4, some of them 0.5, some are 0.6, positions that we needed to put into the budget to either support special education students based on caseload needs, to make whole from the past, or to kind of remediate some of the issues that we've had with staffing.
Sorry. So I met with Mr. Marchand yesterday. One of the things that we're doing is putting together a staffing, looking at our staffing from FY21 to FY22, trying to put it together in what's called FTEs, full-time equivalents. It's a lot easier to compare apples to apples if we just give the numbers. And we have a new director of HR, and I've been working with her, and she's been working with Mr. Coward, because we want to give an accurate representation of our staffing and taking a look so that the community and the council, through this process, we need your support. The way that the charter is, we need the town manager to put forward a budget that includes hopefully a budget that will support the schools. We want to make sure that we answer your questions. We have other workshops coming up to answer questions for the public. We want to see that, the positions that we're putting on are targeted. They're not just, a lot of times when you're in elementary school and the high school, also in the middle school, we have positions that are about numbers. Over the years, we've reduced numbers of teachers, and you'll see our class sizes have increased. There's a lot of research about reducing class size, but we're not at a point where we can even address that, because they're talking about getting down to less than 20 students when we have maximum of 27, 28 at the secondary and 25 at the elementary. But we want to be able to demonstrate exactly the positions we're putting forward. Also positions that are funded through grant programs. We have a lot of special ed support staff and support staff are funded through our Individual Disabilities Education Act grant. And so those are federal funds. And if those funds get cut, we experienced that. I think my first year here, we were cut a significant amount in our federal grants, and we had to make some significant reductions because of those positions. We'll be given that data hopefully next day or so that we can share that at our next presentation, and it'll be a more accurate, so you can see in totality the number of positions we've had over the last couple of years. So I just wanted to share that with you. So this is what we talked about in terms of the summary budget, and the actual there. If you look at the second column, that's the budget that we're going to go over in detail, where we currently are with the school committee. And kind of last night when I was listening to your conversations, this is through March 31st. So you look at where we are in terms of, going into the fourth quarter, and you see the percentages. Some of the things with revenue is you'll see our Medicaid and our tuitions are lagging behind. And we believe that's pandemic related. But those are areas that we have to watch, that there could be areas where there might be shortages in terms of the revenue. When you look at our expenditures, you'll see that, we're 79% areas of purchase services. And I think we talked about that before, supplies and materials. They're obviously running lower because we had less students in school. So we expect this third quarter for them, our fourth quarter for them to be higher. with having more students back. In regards to students, I don't know if I shared this tonight, that many districts will say they have all their students back. But if you look at percentages, we have less than 18% of our students that are remaining on distance learning. And I don't want to point fingers and name other districts, but there are districts around us that have 30 and 40% of their students, even though they're full return, still out on distance learning. So I think it's significant to recognize, and we say we're bringing our kids back, we have many of our students coming back. So we expect some of those areas. We talked about special education services. Now that many of our students are back in the classroom, we may find that there's more services that are needed. So these are areas we need to watch over the last quarter. Mrs. Sands, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk about, the proposed FY22 budget, the areas highlighted in red.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Levis. The two highlighted areas in red are the state aid, which, as Mr. Levis has already talked about, is still not a firm number at this point, even though the governor has said that he will stay close to these numbers. We still have that as a possibility. Tuition's also coming in from other LEAs or other districts, remains to be something that we have to watch in the next 2 or 3 months. So that those are the only two at this point that we're really looking at. The rest is pretty much set. We did experience a decrease in the Medicaid, and we plan to all the other revenue here is on par. Our expenditures show the same exact increases that we've already talked about in previous slides. Mr. Levis, do you want me to go into the COVID budget, or do you want to go forward?
If you want to talk
briefly
about the COVID budget, that's fine.
Yeah, the COVID budget at present, even though that we have not received from RIDE the exact numbers, this is what we feel is a close approximation, if not the exact numbers, on the revenue side on the COVID budget. We also on the 15th, also the school committee did commit or did approve the COVID budget for $3.7 million, and that has already been approved based on the different areas of education, summer programs, and Chromebooks. Thank you.
Part of the COVID funds, and we're not sure exactly yet, but we will be sharing those with some of the private schools, two private schools in particular, Father John V. Doyle and Perspectives. And no, I'm sorry, it's Groden. I believe it's Groden. And once we get the documents from RIDE, that'll break down how much we have to share with them. We'll be able to figure out how the funds that we'll have. But I assume it's going to be probably somewhere around, we were told maybe $600,000 to $800,000. So that $7 million, probably, $7 million will be money. Again, we're using some of it to fill budget gaps, which is not ideal. But the flip side is we're fortunate to be able to do that. The concern will be, and we've said this all along, is getting through FY22, but going into FY23 budget. We have to have these funds spent. Some of them have to be spent by September 30th, 2022. And the American Recovery Plan funds have to be spent by September 30th, 2023. So this again will be a fluid process. It'll be a public process. We'll continue to have conversations, to do presentations with the school committee on how we'll spend these funds moving forward. And finally, the state of Rhode Island just came out with a document. It's embargoed. It'll come out tomorrow, but it really talks about looking at learning loss and the impact of COVID on students and is going to give us some guidance. I think we're in par with it. I looked at it today, especially around the high density tutoring, the summer opportunities, providing, partnerships with community organizations. So we'll probably, not this coming school committee meeting, the following meeting, we'll share that with the school committee.
Mr. Levis,
Yes.
I have some good news for you. As of the Rhode Island Business School Business Managers Association, the SR2 and SR3 funds are already divvied up on the private schools. So whatever we receive on the Excel grants will not include the private school.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to have Mr. Coward talk about curriculum. I know that was something that's been brought up a couple of times in the council meetings, and it's something that despite the challenges we face, despite the pandemic, even the reduction for this year of the Director of Curriculum Instruction Assessment, it's not an area that we've neglected at all. In fact, it's an area that we've continued to move forward. So, Mr. Coward?
Sure. So when I first came on as curriculum director about 5 or 6 years ago, and I went through and analyzed all the different curriculum areas that we had and looked at the documents to see how current our curriculum was. I discovered that curriculum in Coventry was very much out of date and needed to be updated. And for us to be competitive, not to just have our kids do well against themselves and their peers in the coming years, but also to be competitive with other districts and to get our kids ready for post-secondary success, we need to have high quality curriculum. And so we put forward a plan with a 5-year cycle that then renews itself, where we're going to go through every single curriculum area. And we've done that work. We've started that work. We actually addressed some of the oldest areas first. So some of the areas that we talked about were not the most glamorous ones that people always think about, because they get super hyper focused on SATs and standardized testing. So everybody wants to update ELA and math over and over and over again, which are important. I don't disagree. But when you look and realize that our physical education curriculum was 33 years out of date, and our health curriculum was based on standards that existed 2 sets of standards ago, and that our social studies curriculum was last done in 1998, you realize that we really have a systemic curriculum problem across the board. So our plan was to address the oldest, most out-of-date pieces first, and then get the cycle going. So what we focused on is trying to accomplish this with limited funds and limited access, to funds and agencies and programs. So what we did is we pretty early on partnered with the Department of Ed and with Ed Reports. The only cost to the district for us to do that partnership is really the cost of substitute teachers to cover classrooms so that our people can go get training and do the work that needs to be done. It's been a very great process, and we've actually created a really nice relationship with the folks involved with Ed Reports and RIDE. We've been invited to speak on the process with people locally but also nationally, just about our experience and what we've gone through and what we've done. And when we look at curriculum and we identify high quality curriculum, we have to make difficult decisions. And I think we've been smart about it, but we've been frugal because we know that, we have to make the choices that we can afford. And so sometimes the high quality curriculum that we really, really like is way outside of what we can afford. And so we discard that, and then we look at other options. Luckily, in the last number of years, especially the ELA and science, ELA and math, and now science is coming on, there's a number of open source curriculum that are free online. But free is a relative term, because even though the resources are available to you online, you still have to buy the trade books, you still have to buy the manipulatives, you still have to get the professional development, you still have to either pay for copies or get consumables, or what we used to call workbooks. So yes, the actual curriculum might be free, but then we have to make decisions about how we're going to fund the rest of it. So a lot of the work that we've done has come out of the curriculum director's budget. And the way I spend my very small budget in the past was to either provide release time for teachers so they could work during the school year, after their teaching day, or during the summer. And I get representatives from across the 3 levels. And we put them in a room and we look at the standards, and we have a curriculum writing process that we go through. We couple that with what we've been doing with Ed Reports and RIDE, and we've been very successful in moving our curriculum along. And I feel like we're really poised and ready for, really great things. And I gave this example before, but I'll give it again. So our middle school ELA curriculum was what they call locally developed, meaning our teachers created it from scratch, and that's what we taught. And at the time, it was not a bad tool. But as time's gone by and high quality curriculum has been identified and what is needed to have high quality curriculum, we realized we were really behind the times. So fast forward to now, this year, we implemented a high quality curriculum tool. It's called EL. It's actually one of the free open source ones, but we partnered with a print partner, and a print partner provides you print materials and text. And our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders this year, and I know it's a COVID year, but we're still excited, they had full implementation of a high quality, English language arts curriculum. Next year, our grade 3 to 5 kids are going to have that same experience, and our high school kids are going to have that same experience. And then the cycle is going to continue out to the rest of elementary, and then we'll start math at the same time. So the point of this is Dr. Dixon has asked a few different times in writing and in meetings, but we've also had other people talk about, what's going on with curriculum. Well, it's the lifeblood of our district. It's what we do with kids. And we spend a lot of time talking about budgets. We spend a lot of time talking about what we have to cut and what we have to eliminate and how do we get to where we need to be. I honestly don't feel like we spend enough time talking about, curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional development, and things of that nature. And anytime we can bring that forward to the community, I think is time well spent. The other part of this conversation that I just wanted to hit on a little bit was what we call MTSS, which is the multi-tiered system of support. And what that is it's a process, it's a framework that we use to monitor student progress. We screen kids, we collect data on those students, we looked at the data, we have decision-making rules, and we decide based on the data what kind of supports we can provide kids in tier 1, which is, in the whole class, tier 2, which is in small groups, or tier 3, which could be individualized or as many as 2 or 3 kids. And those supports can be academic, they can be behavior, they can be SEL, but it's a way for us to address the needs of our kids at the individual level. So curriculum work, professional development work is that big broad net that you use to try to capture as many kids as you can. We know from the data that we've seen locally and nationally that that curriculum work will definitely address the needs of about 80 to 85% of your kids. But the rest of the students in your district are going to need something more. And MTSS is designed to address what those kids need to get them on target, to close the gaps so that they can be doing grade level work. And this is, and I purposely put it this way, we partnered with other people that would support us, and we do it in a way that's strategic. So we work with Bridge RI, and the Bridge RI people have a lab school at Hopkins Hill, and we have a great relationship with them. They do work with us that they need to do to kind of build their platform, but we get the benefit of learning all the newest best techniques and strategies to support struggling learners. We work with AIR, which is the American Institute for Research. They're out of Washington, D.C. We've had presenters from AIR, and Bridge present at ad staff meetings and faculty meetings and work with teachers. We've worked with CLE, which is the Center for Leadership Equity, Educational Equity, on building SEL at the high school, and that's trickled down throughout the whole district. So the MTSS work has allowed us to be creative in using scientific-based methods to support students who are struggling. And because we are always looking at the best way to get this work done, we found that partnering with the experts and developing those relationships has really paid off for us in the last few years.
Okay. Our last slide is, something again that's come up several times, and I'm going to ask Mr. Coward to kind of take this. But, I mentioned it, I think, in opening in terms of what is our story? How do we get people to come behind to support education? And there's a few times where I said, I don't know what it's going to take for this community. And sometimes I question, do they care about education? And, just being completely honest and transparent. But I had a conversation with Ms. Patno, and it was a good, and, I recently, I took a vacation. I went to California to visit friends and my brother, and I did a lot of reflecting. And what I came to understand is that we are in a community that does care about education. We're in a community that does care about Coventry. There's been a lot of dynamics, a lot that's going on. There's never been a quiet time since I've been in Coventry, whether it's a fire district and now it's Johnson Pond. And, we've had the sewer issue for many, many years. But I do believe this is a community that truly cares about education. We need to find a way not just to hit people up here and resonate, through a cognitive conversation, but we need to resonate in their hearts too, because I truly, again, believe that this is a community that cares. So Don's going to talk a little bit about what our story is and why we think that we can get the community to rally around not just our budget, but the budget for this entire community.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with what you just said, Mr. Levis, about hearts and minds, because people have to have, you're going to win people's hearts and minds if you're going to have people support you as an organization, as an institution, as a school, as a community. And so when I thought about our story, I tried to think, what could I write? What could I create to try to capture what I think and what we think as a school department is our story? And, when I started writing, it was way too long. And so, I did a quick Google search about how to write what could be effective elevator speech, something that you could do in a matter of minutes with anybody, whether you're at the dry cleaners or you're in the lobby of McDonald's, or if you're hanging out at Tractor Supply looking at baby chickens, right? What could you talk about to get people excited about what you do? And so I wrote this, and I'm going to read it because I think if you're going to tell your story, you can't just skim over it. You have to hear it, and it has to resonate with you. So this is what we came up with, and a lot of what's here is rooted in our mission statement. It's rooted in the curriculum work we're doing. It's rooted in SEL. So I'm just going to read it slowly, I hope. Students, staff, and families have to believe that Coventry Public Schools is a great place to grow, learn, and work. Our staff are among the best in the state with numerous national board certifications, advanced degrees, state and local recognition, and a longstanding dedication to the community, which, by the way, many of our faculty members live in Coventry and their kids go to our schools. So that shows trust. The curriculum, instructional pedagogy, and assessment platforms are going through a complete multi-year revision process and are being updated to meet the needs of all our students. The learning environment is inclusive, where all students are challenged to be critical thinkers, reflective learners, responsible individuals, and global citizens. Our goal is to be recognized as one of the top school departments in Rhode Island. This will be accomplished through building trust, relationships, and a one community focus that will elevate the entire town of Coventry. That's our story.
So that, I know it's taken a little time, but that is our presentation. The part that we'll add to this, like I said, is after we present the budget to actuals to the school committee this Thursday night, we'll share the documents with the council. I know we have more meetings coming up, but with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Dixon, and any questions or comments any of us can answer, including the school committee. We welcome the questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Levis, Mr. Sands, and Mr. Coward. I'd like to open it up to council members who would like to ask questions on this presentation. Mr. Levis, you want to entertain questions on the more detailed budget itself that you presented, or would you like to start this budget presentation?
Whatever you choose. Like I said, we wanted to do a presentation that kind of hit some of the questions that we have been asked, but also gave kind of an overview of, why this budget and in the key areas. And so I know we covered a lot, but I think it's, again, we'll leave the questions up to you, and hopefully we can answer them. If we can't, we'll get back to you. And as I've always said, we'll share a document with the entire committee and the community about questions that are asked, and we'll always entertain anybody offline wanting to meet with us. I had sat down with Mr. Marchand, and I'm still looking forward to sitting down with him and Mr. Sands and Ms. Mills to go over, because we haven't even had the opportunity to really do that. And, we're well into the process, but I want that opportunity, and I know he's graciously offered to take time to do that. Listening to your agenda last night and his report, I mean, there's a lot going on, to say the least, so.
Okay, well, I'd like to ask members of the council to ask a few questions to start us off. I see Mrs. Shockley. Mrs. Shockley.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for going into more detail on what we're doing to improve the education for all the students in Coventry. As a town, we've been doing that at our regular meetings, putting forward who runs the different departments and what they're doing for our town, what services are being provided. And, tonight, you guys did a really great job in saying, this is how we're improving curriculum. This is how we're doing things for the kids. This is what we're planning on over the summer, if possible. So I think that was really great detail to get as we look at, 800 pages of really cold numbers. But because we are here to talk about the cold numbers too, I just wanted to ask, so when you were going over the numbers for the maintenance costs based on Rhode Island General Law 16723, I didn't do the math. So I didn't realize that for 2022, the different things you've put there don't add up to the 1.895 million that we need to spend. I think you have the difference in, I came up with a slightly different number, but you have a difference of about $230,000 that still needs to be spent. Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so
if you look at the budget on 2022, you'll see that there is still a balance left. And you'll see that on at just below total expenditures of 228,677.
Mhm.
So that's what we are looking at possibly being what's left over. But at the same time, we also feel that there may be some movement in 2022 to be able to cover that cost as well. But that's where we're looking at right now. As a budget, we're doing the best we can to approximate what's going to happen in 2022.
I had a conversation with Dr. Joe De Silva, and it pertained to the school building committee. And I had I think a brief conversation with Mr. Murray, the school building committee chair, afterwards. And one of the things that Dr. De Silva and I talked about, again, this is everything is fluid, but trying to find a way to use some of our COVID funds also for improving our educational facilities, because we can get housing aid reimbursement on that. So if we, depending on the rate, right now I think our rate is what, 42%. So if we come into a need, and obviously this will be discussed with the school committee, that we can utilize some of our funds to help with the maintenance requirement. When I heard you talk about, we know about capital and the needs of capital in this community. And again, I have no say in terms of how the town spends any money. But when I heard about the $2.3 million and you guys were gonna, again, at the end of the year, have a conversation, I was hoping that maybe some of that money would be utilized towards capital, at least on the town side, because we know it's such a great need in this community. So we haven't had that conversation with the school committee yet, but that's a conversation that we'll have, I think, in terms of looking at other needs that we have, because while we're in the process of necessity of school construction, we know that's not going to address all of our needs. We know the Jacobs report talked about $60 million, and we're not attacking all those needs. So that's an area that, we feel that we'll be coming back to the school committee and taking a look. So yes, there is a need, but I think we did say we feel comfortable that we'll be able to address those needs during this year. And that's why I think I also had shared that we need to continuously meet with Mr. Marchand and Ms. Mills, because we don't want a gotcha on either end at the end of the year. So maintenance is going to be something we focus on throughout the year. But as it stands right now, there is a balance.
okay, so the balance is there right now, but if you're considering COVID funds to pay for that, just to make sure that we don't lose out on any housing aid.
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to be honest, one of the things that, I didn't get into, but that, and the reason we put that chart up there, that, we need to work with you and we need to come together. And Don had, eloquently said, we need to focus as one community. I've said this all along, the language we all use, it has a great impact on this community. And I've seen it work the opposite just in my recent experience here. But we're using our COVID funds for operations, right? That's not ideal. We're using our structural deficit, our fund balance for operations isn't ideal. So, these are conversations we're going to continue to have with the school committee about our use of our COVID funds. We think, maybe if we have the funds available, using it for, for our facilities improvement isn't a bad way to use it, especially if we can get the 42% reimbursement.
Okay, so I just want to make, like I said, it's been a long day. It's 8:30. I want to make sure I'm understanding. I don't want the town to lose out on any housing aid.
So yeah, but the thing
I don't
is,
know if maybe Mr. Sands might be able to.
we would ask that housing aid, hopefully that housing aid would go back, that we could utilize that. So this isn't going to be decided tonight, right? But the housing aid, we would want to be able to, if we invest $230,000 of COVID and we get 42% of that back, we'd like to be able to reinvest that back into our schools. Again, we could use that towards other facilities needs, and then we could get housing aid theoretically back on that. So that we're not going to resolve that tonight, but that is the intent of it, so that we can continue to use seed money that will allow us to continue to improve our facilities and our needs, so we don't end up in the situation that we've ended up in, because of lack of funding for capital for, the last 10, 15 years. So I think we're on the same page that we definitely, that's how we want to utilize this. So we don't lose out on any housing aid that we could get in return.
Okay. Then I just want to confirm, so the school committee has already approved the COVID budget. So that's just totally separate. The town council isn't involved in that particular part of your budget?
No, well, let me be clear too. The town council's role is to approve a budget, right? The way the charter is, you have to put forward a number, it's voted up or down. The school committee controls how the funds are spent. So the conversation should be clarified. My belief is, and again, I'm only one person, but my belief should be the committee, the council, the questions should be clarifying questions, but the school committee determines how we spend the fund. So we're doing this to make sure we clarify for you and for the citizens of the community. But I want to be clear, the school committee is the one that has oversight over the budget. And so that's why, I'm saying we want to make sure that we answer your questions, but my direction comes from the school committee. And if they have questions about curriculum and how we're doing, that's a question that I will go to them for. I'll answer any questions you have, but the town council doesn't have oversight in terms of how we are. I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You already know how much you're getting. The school committee decides how it's spent. That's fine. And then I just wonder, why is there a decrease in our Medicaid? Or do we have less students taking advantage of that sort of, who need that sort of program, or?
So Medicaid, and I can answer this because I'm a former special ed director, Medicaid's based on eligibility, right? So first of all, parents need to consent to it. So a child could be Medicaid eligible, but if a family doesn't consent, we can't access the funds. Even though we let them know this won't impact their ability to receive benefits. So it all depends on the number of services. We work with a company to try to maximize the amount of reimbursement we can get. So I think a lot of it right now is that some of these services, if it's virtual, we're not providing some of this, right? So when students are at home, there may be services like, for instance, activities of daily living, helping kids that have intellectual disability learn how to do like life skills. There's medical, taking care, hygiene. We may not be doing those if the students are not in school. So there are some services we're not able to provide. I don't know if that answers your question, but when students come back to us, there's a greater opportunity for us to maximize the amount of revenue we can receive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another member of the council, Mr. LeBlanc.
First, I just want to say thank you, Mr. Levis, for your presentation tonight, and Mr. Sands for your contribution. Really appreciate it. I did like the chart that you did share. It certainly told a story, Mr. Levis. I did ask for a specific chart on enrollment and local appropriation. So I created it myself. I used eride.ri.gov, and then I used municipalfinance.ri.gov for the local appropriations based off the budget within the financial statements. Since FY11, enrollment started at 5,311 students based off of eride.ri.gov. And then through FY 2021, it actually decreased down to 4,390. So that's 1,011 students or 19%. In that same time frame, local appropriations actually increased about $5.5 million or 13.2%. So those numbers certainly tell an interesting story. When I look at the budget, the slide that you shared, and you look at local appropriation, just comparing 21 to 22 in state aid, there's actually an increase of $2,508,025. On top of the 2.5 million, I believe the school is getting an additional 5 million in COVID money as well. But what I'm concerned about is that the FY22 budget is, you're reflecting a deficit, regardless if we give you maintenance or not. Maybe you could just point out 2 or 3 main reasons for that deficit, given that you're asking for a 4% local appropriation increase and you're getting COVID funds and you're getting more state aid.
So a couple things is that I don't agree with your numbers for enrollment. And part of it is that it depends on what numbers you're pulling. So you could be pulling different numbers off. So we can address this offline. Mr. Sands and I did talk about this today, your request. We use either like October 1st enrollment or March 1st.
I was using October is what I was using.
So, but some of those numbers, there's even within those numbers, because we definitely have more than 4,300 students that we're directly servicing. And if you look at, take away homeschool students, then you look at students that we're paying tuition for that are in other districts. So that's, again, we can clarify that. So again, the second part in terms of state aid, I wasn't sure what point you were making there. I missed that part.
So my point there is that local appropriation, if you get the 4%, that's an additional, let's just call it 1.9 million. And then based off of FY22 and FY21, but the budgets, you're getting an increase of 624,000. So a total of 2.5 million plus the 5 million in COVID monies. I'm having a hard time understanding why we're submitting a budget that it has a deficit and it's not actually balanced.
Well, I mean, I think we can go through the items, but a couple things is that the COVID money is one-time funds, right? And you've seen that we're using $1.5 million in FY21 to fund operations. And again, once I think we give you the more detailed after Thursday night, that might make more sense. So we're filling operations with 1.5 million, the 200,000, 1.3 million. So we're projecting. So we also have, if you look in the budget, we had 300 and some, I think it was 300 and some odd $1,000 of one-time revenue that was from ransomware, and that was in FY21, right? So we're not carrying that over into FY22. So I think just if you reduce those alone, just the, again, pull out the COVID funds, because we can explain how we're using those. And I think we gave some detail tonight how we're using those. But if you take out the surplus that we're using, which is the 1.5 million, right? So we're using that for FY21. We don't have that going into FY22. So that in itself is a structural deficit. I don't know, Mr. Sands, if there's areas that you want to highlight. I didn't pull the budget up. I can.
No. Mr. LeBlanc, you had a question on why it wasn't balanced, and it's because of the use of funds balance that we're asking for in the one-time cost of school lunch and operations. The 700,000 would then balance the budget as far as that's concerned.
Okay, I guess I'll wait until you guys have your meeting on Thursday. Maybe we can get some additional information, but I just think that we should be submitting truly balanced budgets. And then, Mr. Levis, you did state that this is a work in process. Do you know when you believe this budget would be a final budget that we would be receiving from the school, but with final numbers, or do you believe this is the end all be all budget?
You know, I think, I don't know if I'm muted. Okay, I think that once we get sure numbers from the state, that'll help us right now. I mean, so that, you know, we don't know exactly, you know, still with our federal grants and all that stuff. I mean, but I would think we're pretty close to a final budget. You know, I do want to make sure that we answer your question. So again, obviously, you know, we can get more details and I want to get back to you, but you know, I think using, as Mr. Sand said, the fact that we're using surplus or fund balance to balance FY21, and we're continuing to use it in FY22. I look at the COVID as completely separate, and we've said that we believe we're going to have a real challenging time in budget of FY23. So I need to go back and look at the state numbers because, you know, over time, our state aid, we had 1 year where we received $1.8 million increase, but prior to that, we've received the years around it, we've received decreases, including a $900,000 decrease this year. So I need to look at those state numbers because it's not adding up as you're presenting it. And I know you're a numbers guy too, so I'm not challenging.
I'll share screenshots from the state's website for those enrollment numbers.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
No problem. That's all I have, President Dixon.
Okay, thank you. You have a couple of members of the school committee with hands raised, Mrs. Patno.
Thank you, President Dixon. So, Mr. Pearson, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. Just quickly, interesting conversation about enrollment. I don't think it went well. So in an effort to be more transparent, Mr. Levis, when you put together the enrollment information for Mr. LeBlanc about not only which students are enrolled in our schools, but other students we might be servicing, please provide a copy of that to the school committee as well. Because the way it's been presented here, I'm not comfortable with how it sounded, because when you go to RIDE's website and you look up October enrollment numbers, and it comes up with 4,300 and change for enrollment. So saying that number is inaccurate is not quite correct. So let's make sure we put out correct information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. And I believe, Mr. Murray, you have a hand raised.
Yeah, just along the same lines. So there was a lot going on in that exchange, and one is the enrollment numbers entangled with the budget. And the thing to also remember is, so for instance, for the building stage 2 report, we use NESDEC numbers, and there was some challenge on that by Member Pearson on that one. And I understand that, and we do need to get more solid numbers on district, but it's not a linear equation. Like even though enrollment, let's say, goes down, it's not like a student drops out and then you can close down a classroom, consolidate, and reduce your budget, right? So it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I think we need to understand that when we're talking in terms of the budget. Also, keep in mind that our state aid is tied to also those students. Money follows the student. So again, if that student doesn't exist or the enrollment goes down, it doesn't mean that we can necessarily consolidate. Sometimes it actually puts more money on the local district to fund, because we lose that state aid, but we still have to support the classroom. Now that classroom has, let's say, instead of 25 students, they have 22 across district. So I just want to make sure that when we have these conversations, I think it's a great question, and we need to provide those clarifying numbers, but we don't muddle that up. The last point is, about the budget this year. Just want to remind everybody, we went through 3 budget cycles last year. I felt the tone of tonight was very, very different than some of the past presentations we've had. But keep in mind that we did get level funded last year, and we plugged some holes with monies that were saved. So it's a little bit more complicated when we talk about this year and showing a deficit. And we're also plugging holes all over the place with other monies coming in prospectively. Hopefully we get all those. So as we get this, whatever data you need to follow the tangled web of financials this year, we just want to make sure whatever you need, we get you. Because we want to, if you have a question, the community is going to have a question. We need to make sure we clarify that in a very simple way for the community to understand. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Let me just clarify again, and Mr. Pearson brought up a good point. I'm not saying that the ride number that's there isn't their number, right? It's a number that they put in there. Part of the reason why state aid has been such an issue for FY22 is because the accuracy of the numbers. The numbers are there, but they also recognize it may not be capturing, that's why there was concern about using the March numbers for March of 1st of 2021, because again, they're concerned about how those numbers are utilized in terms of the funding formula. So I'm not saying that what you read was not the number that's there, but there's a lot of conversation that we've had as superintendents have had in terms of how they're using those numbers for state aid. So I'm only concerned when that number is being utilized because the state is saying that they recognize there may not be accuracy in some of those numbers. So again, I don't want to be stating that those numbers are not on the RIDE website. So again, I will get more information and we'll come back in, but that was a point well taken.
Thank you, Mr. Levis. I would just mention before I go to Ms. Ludwig that I too went to the RIDE website, and I think the bottom line, so to speak, is that there has been a decrease of about 1,000 students over the last 10-year period. So I think that's one point that could be made. How those numbers are calculated, what they include, I'm sure maybe the inclusion of certain data may change from year to year, but it just looks like there was a significant drop of enrollment. And I do understand Mr. Murray's comment about when you lose a student, you don't necessarily lose a classroom or a teacher. But I would like to go to Ms. Ludwig next.
Thank you, President Dixon, and thank you, Mr. Levis, Mr. Cowart, and Mr. Sands for presenting. I had a few questions on the materials that were presented. Maybe what I can start with, in the recent competitive grant awards page, you had mentioned that we got approximately $1 million over 3 years for the state pre-K program. I just wanted to know, is that free for residents? Does that money go towards the teachers, for the students, for everything? So they don't have to pay anything to join that program?
There's a lottery that they participate in, but you're right, they don't pay anything for that program.
Okay, I would have loved to win that lottery. So that's fantastic. I also thought you had mentioned that you're working to fund the health clinic or a health clinic at Coventry High School. That sounds fantastic. So I think you're working on some really cool projects. I have a question on use of fund balance slide. Can you just talk to us a little bit about, in your last bullet, it says we show a one-time lunch and operation shortfall. And I know we had talked previously about having some sort of federal help for school lunch this year because of COVID. I don't know if I don't know if it's apples to apples, but can you just explain to me what the lunch and operation shortfall is?
So the lunch shortfall is that we projected a deficit of about 200,000. When I believe it was maybe 2 budgets ago, there was some discussion publicly around a payment that we made. So when Ms. Mangiarelli came on, we found out that there had been a $400 and some odd thousand amount that was due to the food service that had been carried over from when Chartwell's was here, and that was passed on to Aramark and then through Sodexo. Our food service program runs typically a deficit, and there's a union that's part of it. There's 6 districts in the state that have this union, and we have positions, and again, I don't begrudge the employees, these were negotiated, but there's 10 positions that are full benefits. So our expenses are a lot more than other districts, and so we typically have been running deficits. with the food through the USDA, the food program being free and us not providing hot meals, we had cut down some of the labor costs over the summer, when we were doing the grab and go meals.
Oh, yeah.
And that was able to cut into our deficit. We were projecting, I think last year, a $300,000 deficit. So this year we projected 200,000. The way we've been servicing meals, and again, I don't have this the definite numbers, but I did have a conversation. I know Mr. Sands had reached out to Sodexo, Kristen Morello, and Paula Patton, who's the manager. We think that we've been digging, tackling that deficit by maybe $5,000 to $10,000 a month based on the process we have. But based on what we were looking at this year and next year, we projected again $200,000 deficit. So we found out that the food, we could be providing meals free to all students through next year, which includes this summer. So it should allow us to hopefully attack that deficit again. But that's a long-term situation we have to deal with the food service company, which is Sodexo right now, in terms of how they negotiate contracts with their employees. But that's kind of just unfortunately inherent in the contract. What they try to do is increase meals, by getting more students to purchase meals. We also try to make sure that we capture everybody typically who's eligible for free and reduced lunch. That helps us with our meal count and reimbursement. But right now, there's no requirement for families to fill out those. And that's a whole nother part around, state funding and our funding formula. We get a percentage for students that are identified as free and reduced lunch. And right now, our numbers are dismal, just like every other district. So it's all tied together in terms of our state aid and, with the food service. We're hoping again to tackle that deficit, but.
Okay, so I didn't understand it was carried forward. I thought it was only for last year. Thank you. My next question is on the curriculum slide. So Mr. Coward, thank you for going over the new curriculum coming out to a couple of those grade levels over the next couple of years. I just want to make sure I understand how this was funded, because I know there was a lot of talk on this last year. So is there a curriculum coordinator? Is there a role?
So my former position before I became assistant superintendent was director of curriculum instruction and assessment for the district. I held that position through July. When Lori Andrews, the former assistant, took a position in Situate as the superintendent, I was moved into her position as assistant superintendent. To save money, we left my former position unfilled. So the position exists in our organizational structure, but we didn't fill the position because we were trying to find ways to cut and save because we were in a very tricky situation. Because I was doing the curriculum work already, I kind of do two jobs, right? I do the curriculum work and the assistant superintendent work. We kind of spread some of the responsibilities to some other people. Our goal is to have that position filled for 22 with a new director of curriculum. And then we have coordinators, like content specific coordinators at the middle school and high school, sort of like they like department heads, but we call them curriculum coordinators.
Okay, so so maybe I can summarize this. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So the position was there, is there, and we're looking to fill it in 22.
Yeah, we actually have interviews scheduled for next week.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, I did have a couple of comments that I wanted to make on the overall presentation. So along with some of the comments I heard earlier, I do think that there are a couple areas that are important coming into this that I'm thinking about that I wanted to share. The maintenance costs, I think those are very important and we definitely need to look at those. So thank you, Member Shockley, for bringing those up. And I concur that we absolutely need to keep an eye on that. I did want to ask, at this point, whether it's Mr. Marchand or Director Mills, based on the numbers that we've seen come in on the school side, is there anything we can do about the 439 that we lost from last year? Is there any way that we can ensure, or I don't know if I'm saying it right, get it back, but is there anything we can do at this point about last year's funds?
Yes, there is, Ms. Jen. We have to spend not only the 1.8 that's required by the end of FY21, 6/30/21, we have to spend, I believe we sent that memo out, or Ben did, to Mr. Levis and Harold Sands. We need to spend the 1.8, which will cover the 6/30/21 maintenance costs plus the additional 439. So the state has been gracious and put that aside in an escrow. That's not, they don't technically have to do that. So we have to make sure that we spend all that maintenance cost, or we are going to lose it. In addition to losing it, I think it's, and I'm not sure if the town council knows this, if you don't fill the maintenance cost, you cannot get past phase 1 of when you do a school bond for a new project. So if they see that you're failing the maintenance cost, you won't even get past phase 1 application for a new school bond. So that's, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that, but I wanted to, it's a pretty serious thing that we need to make sure we fulfill those maintenance costs by, and they have to be spent by 6/30. And because we could potentially lose the state aid, and we could potentially have a problem for, the new school that they want. So there's some issues there, and because I did talk to an officer regarding that at the state, because if we do not fill those maintenance costs, the reason why that the regulation is out there and it's a state law is because they don't want schools crumbling. They don't want, bricks falling down and towns not maintaining the schools. So they have a minimum requirement. And if they see that we're not fulfilling the minimum requirement, it would be problematic to quote unquote get a new school, because then the way the state sees it is they're going to be contributing 50% or whatever rate we qualify, let's say 52.8% of the expense or the bond. That's a bigger chunk than what they're going to give us for the 2%, right? So the reason why I know this is a long-winded answer, but the whole reason why they have that minimum requirement is because they don't want people the municipalities just to let the schools go, and then the state has to come in and give them 50% to build a whole new school. So that's the whole purpose of that law.
So now that you see the presentation, and I'm looking at the slide for maintenance costs, it looks like what we said, the number here is 1.4. So are we going to need to look at that again in the next?
I think we need to, me and Ben need to meet with Mr. Levis and Harold Sands again and just make sure that, we have to approach this as a team and make sure that we have those actual expenditures spent right now, or a majority of them. And if we don't have them spent, we need to have some kind of plan, because this has got to be a team effort to make sure that obviously the town, we don't want to lose the state aid, the state housing aid, excuse me. But also we want to go forward with that school bond. So it's a dual purpose to work as a team here to make sure we will qualify for that.
And I just say that just to be clear, that money went into account, was taken from the town, went into account for the schools, right? So, and that's part of the funds that we've used, and we've presented that to the school committee and to the town council about how our plan is to utilize that for air quality, the ERV, the machines that the air exchange machines in the building. So, and I agree, that's the reason. But, just so you know, when we talk to Rye, and this has nothing to do with anybody on this meeting, but Coventry has been notorious. I mean, the fact that there was a process where, bond process, but it wasn't followed properly. We've been told we left like $1.8 million of housing aid, and this is prior to any of our time here on the table. So I think our intent is to definitely work at it as a team, but I think the bigger issue is to work as a team with the budget. Because, and again, I know there's some clarification needs to take place, and we're not going to resolve it now. But if the thought process is that the schools are overpaid, that they're not funded, that they're given too many funds, then we have a problem, because part of the reason is, we hadn't received capital, nor has the town side, for 12 years. And when we talk about the school, this is a regulation put in place for the schools, but you have incredible needs on the town side with your buildings too. So I think, moving forward, we definitely want to meet. Like I said, we haven't met with Ms. Mills or Mr. Marchand about the budget to go through to see what questions they have in detail. And we definitely want to do that. So we have nothing but the intent to continue to work with you guys moving forward to get a budget that we can all get behind approved. And you're right, we want to make sure we meet that maintenance requirement. So.
Okay, so the reason I bring it up is because obviously the 1.8 is a lot different than the 1.4 that's on the slide. So maybe Mr. Marchand and Director Mills, once you have a chance to meet with Mr. Levis and Mr. Sands, you can give us an update on this number. Okay, and then I also had a few general statements about the budget that's been presented, and also in relation, Mr. Levis, to your initial comment about having students head back into in-person learning. When I was on the campaign trail last year, I met with a number of people who said, "Oh, distance learning is amazing, and I'm so glad that we can cut down on some of our costs." And then I experienced it for myself. And I have children in my household that have done distance learning, and it is awful. It's awful. So I am very happy for the families who are opting to go back to in-person learning. I'm very happy that the schools are open. It is a night and day difference between my kindergartners who are reading now versus when we started the school year and I'm trying to teach them how to read. It is a night and day difference. So, congratulations to all the families who are headed back in. Thank you for everyone's effort on the school side. I know that's a massive effort to get everyone in. I am a supporter in general of the schools. I love the information on the curriculum that was put out tonight and the grant information. I do share some of the same concerns that it sounds like Mr. LeBlanc had in terms of whether there is a deficit here or not, because on the executive slide, it does look like there's a deficit. So in my mind, that would be a very important point for us to make sure that everyone is understanding. Are we saying there's a deficit, or are we saying that no, this will be balanced going in? Because I think our duty is to have a balanced budget. So
we have to have a balanced budget. So the budget we present, but I think it's how we're filling. We've talked about through this presentation using fund balance to fill the hole, right? So we have to put forward a balanced budget, but I think it's how we get there. And so I do need to understand more some of the conversation that Mr. LeBlanc had shared. I want to make sure that I understand so I give the right information. But definitely legally, we have to have a balanced budget. We have to present that to the voters.
Okay, thank you. Mr. LeBlanc, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I just had a question. Included in the binder that we received, the capital improvement program, one of the lines was paving. This is kind of it was just an odd line for me. And each year we're budgeting $1,055,935 for each year for the 5-year plan. Why is paving in the school's budget is my first question. And my second question is, why is it $1,055,000 for every single year?
first of all, we just broke it out. What the need was, we broke it out over 5 years. But we're responsible for the parking lots, the entrances of our schools. So I don't know if that answered your question, but we took this based off of, again, the Jacobs report and the needs that we had. And I believe we had this conversation with the council, but it might have been just with the school committee. In the past, we had just been putting forward pretty much the same items that to the council, to the school committee, to get approved as a capital list. And those items might have been, $500,000, if that a year. Then we found out through a conversation about impact fees and how the capital needs of the community, not just the school department, played into how those impact fees were determined. So basically, we were misrepresenting the needs of the school department. And so that's why we put together, I believe it's 25 items over, 5 years. So we're not trying to pile it on. We're just trying to give, again, we had the Jacobs report that I can share a copy with, if Mr. Blank, if you don't have one, I can share that. I can share that with all the council members. And then we had Studio Jade, when they reviewed the Jacobs report, they had added, I think for inflation reasons, about maybe from 60 million to maybe $70 million. So that's what we've done. So we just broke that up over 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the insight.
Okay, I have a couple of questions I'd like to start with. One is fund balance, and we've been talking about it. I understand it is legal to use fund balance to support the operations of the budget. However, I am concerned about the sustainability of using fund balance as a safety net. It seems like it's being used as a safety net, and I'm thinking back to when we approved the CTA contract. The first year we were supposed to save a little less than 500,000. The second year, which we are in, is going to cost about 350,000 or so. And the third year of that contract is going to cost over $1 million unless you are able to renegotiate a little bit earlier and start at the end of year 2 instead of the end of year 3. So what is the plan to eliminate the use of fund balance or anything like it as a safety net in order to balance the budget? I'm not sure. Some people are frozen, some people are not.
I'm wondering if the school department didn't lose internet because both Mr. Sands and Mr. Levis are frozen.
Okay, Mr. Coward, are you able to address that question?
I'll do the best I can. So, what we've done is we built a budget based on the revenue sources that we have. And unfortunately, some of the revenue sources we have are coming from fund balance. They're not coming from other places. And so we are using those funds to support some of the operational things that we have in place. I think ultimately we would not want to do that. Like, we don't think that's the best way to build a budget for the school department. I think we're doing it now because we're kind of in a pickle and we're trying to find the best ways to patch the budget so we can get through this year and get through next year. And I think that's kind of what was displayed in the budget document that Mr. Sands had shared, how we're using those funds to fill holes. Ultimately, that's not what we should be doing. If there's any fund balance, we should be using it for startup. I know, like, every year, come July 1st, we're in a new budgetary cycle. And in the beginning of that budgetary cycle, we usually get an influx of bills from our different vendors, different computer programs that we use. And we use the money that we end with in June to start the next year off so that we can get all those bills paid. What we have going into next year is nothing, right? Because we've spent all the funds that we've had this year because we were level funded, and then we had a reduction from the state side.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm thinking long term, like next year. What can you do? What are the contingency plans? What's plan B? What's plan C? If you need to balance your budget and you don't even have any fund balance available to use. I mean, what kind of conversations have you had concerning how you will balance your budget going into the following year? Because that's only 1 year away. And we should be thinking long term, like 5 years down the road, but I'm thinking the following year.
Dr. Dixon, I think that, here's our reality, and I can't speak for the school committee, so they're on, this would be a decision, but, we were level funded during the pandemic. And while, there were 2 districts in the state level funded. One was our neighbors, Exeter, West Greenwich. And yet we still continued to move forward, do what we need to do. Without COVID funds, without fund balance, I don't know where we'd be. We know we're going to have a difficult time in FY23. But if you look historically, and part of the issue too is that historically, at least with the council, I don't know how familiar you've been, in the last 6 years with the budgets, but when we come forward, we make cuts, we've reduced positions. So we may be coming forward with additional positions, but overall, we may reduce classrooms in the elementary school. We may have reduced programs. We do reduce programs at the high school based on numbers. So our class sizes, as Mr. LeBlanc brought, there has been a reduction in students. There was a time where I think the high school had, 2,000 students in it, and we had close to 6,000 students in Coventry. Across the state, there's a reduction. But I think we've done due diligence, looking at our numbers, how we address student need, also moving forward. But at some point, we're just going to have to ask the state for involvement. I mean, I've said this before, and I think it was interpreted differently. We do budgeting every single day. We look at numbers. We went forward and we didn't have sports this year. We've had times where we laid off because of the process. We laid off 300 and some odd teachers, and we lost about 47 teachers, people that we had invested in, that had we had put time into, and they went to other districts because of the process. But at some point, we're going to just have to, go to the state like we did before. If it wasn't for COVID funds, we'd be in a different situation right now.
Mhm.
So but we all know, and you guys had a conversation last night I listened to, you're able to take funds and use it to pay COVID funds, right? You were able to use it to pay salaries. And then at the end of the year, you're going to have flexibility in how you use those funds. We're using those same funds for operations, that we may not have that flexibility. So, we've said this when Ms. Mangiarelli was here. These are not ideal situations, but we need to do what we need to do. In part of the COVID funds, whether it's Sr2 or ARP, President Biden's funding is to make sure that we maintain the level of services and support. So, we're going to be in a tough situation, and that's why it's so important for us to work together and to, keep on dialogue till we can come up with something that we fully agree on collectively.
Well, we absolutely all want. One of us has said that many times. I'm just concerned not only about this year, but even next year. And as I said, long term almost seems like next year. We want to see the sustainability of the school. We want to see a balanced budget. And there needs to be some dialogue, not only about this year, but what's the plan? What's a contingency plan when you don't have any fund balance and you still need to balance the budget? So we've talked a lot about this evening. I'd like to go on to my second question, and that has to do, of course, with curriculum. Mr. Coward, I always enjoy listening to you. You're very passionate about your work, whether it's teacher evaluation or setting up testing assessments or working on curriculum. So it really is a joy to hear you speak so passionately about everything. Now, this evening, I heard about a high quality curriculum. This was a little new term for me. I understand the concept. But every year for about the past 6 to 8 years, I've heard about a new curriculum activity. And I can understand why this has been happening. But every year there's a new curriculum activity. It's almost like a startup business, because every time you start a curriculum, as you yourself said, nothing is free. The curriculum might be free, but you've got to train the teachers, you've got to get new materials. The students have to be reoriented into a new pattern of thinking. I remember back to the new math days, and I think when 2 and 2 equal 5 or something like that.
I don't think so.
Yeah, but my question to you is this, and you mentioned it yourself. Suppose you were standing in front of Dave's Market or CVS a couple of weeks from now. We've only got about 6 weeks to get this budget passed. What is your elevator speech that you're going to give to people that you can tell them, with all these efforts in curriculum work, in academic work, in programs that you've instituted this, tried something else, what have you been able, or what can you say has been the progress, the academic progress of the students over the past 3 years?
Yeah, and I think when you measure progress, you have to look at it a lot of different ways, right? Because there's academic progress, there's progress in social emotional learning, there's progress in your learning environment and how you make people feel included and inclusive in their learning, safe, secure, happy. So there's lots of ways to look at progress. I will say that if you would ask me that question pre-COVID, it'd be a lot easier to answer. Because as Mrs. Ludwig said, distance learning threw a monkey wrench into everything. We didn't collect any data on student learning at the end of last year. There was no standardized testing, there was no STAR. So we have no data from that year. This year we started with a disrupted start. We had students in at the elementary level part of the week. We had middle school and high school kids coming in hybrid, and we had a slow rollout. So our middle school and high school kids, the last group to come in didn't come in until the middle of October. And flash forward to where we are now, we're just now making it so everybody's got the opportunity to come back in, 5 days a week. But I'll say this, and this is, something that I don't have prepared in front of me, but I look at this stuff every single day. I was on Niche today, and I was looking at where we fell. And if you don't know what Niche is, it's this website where you can go and, if you're highly ranked, you love it. And if you're low ranked, you hate it, right? And it basically looks at all the different parts of your community. It looks at diversity, it looks at test scores, it looks at teacher quality, it looks at student progress, it looks at a lot of different metrics. And one of the first things it said in the description of Coventry Public Schools is said that Coventry Public Schools is don't quote me, but use some terminology like a high performing or an advanced school department heading in the right direction, because we're making growth, we're moving forward. And when you look at it, our teacher quality was an A or an A+, and we were ranked 4th in the state in teacher satisfaction. That's a good thing. So then I quickly jumped over and looked at US and News Report. So on Niche, we were ranked, I think, 19. On US News, we were ranked 20th. In another one, we were ranked, I think, 21st. Point being, that's out of 60. Years ago, when I first came on in Coventry, we were 23rd, 24th, 25th. We were sort of like the middle of the pack community. We were doing okay. I look at us as making progress. I look at us as moving in the right direction. But it's slow and steady. It's not gonna be the rabbit race where you're 21st and then you're 5th. Like, it doesn't work that way. You have to invest time and you have to invest funds. You have to get the hearts and minds of people behind it. And you think about your last question and this question, they're almost opposing forces, right? On one hand, we're saying you can't keep using fund balance. How are you going to make it work? You're running out of options. You need to make it work. But then on the other hand, we're saying, how can we invest in curriculum? How can we do better for students? How can we do better for teachers? How can we prove people that the investment is worth their time and money? Those things don't match up. You don't get the best quality, the best product without investing in it. And so when you don't have steady, predictable investment, steady, predictable budgeting, whether it's, 2% a year, 2.5% a year, if people can't rely on the funding that they need to make advancement, every year we're kind of like what you said, we're trying to figure it out, right? All right, this year we don't have anything. What can we do? Next year we have a little bit more. So let's try something different. That's not how you win the race. You have to kind of have a program. And our program has been steady and has been moving in the right direction, but it's hard to be predictable when you don't have the resources you need to do that. And so when you look at other communities that spend a little bit more per pupil than we do, those communities have infrastructure to support curriculum. What we have right now is me and Erin Coyne in central office, who are the curriculum people. We're the people who run it for the whole district. Now, fortunately, we have a huge support system of teachers that support that work, whether they're curriculum people at the building level, reading interventionists, other directors. But the point is, we're slim, we're thin. You go to another district equal in size, they have 5, 6 different people doing the exact same work that we're doing. So my elevator speech was the speech on my last slide of the presentation. You made me come up with another one. I don't know if it was as eloquent because I didn't have time to write it and proofread it. But the point is, if you want something good for your students and families and kids, You have to invest in it, and you have to invest it in a way that is going to have the most impact.
Well, I mean, that's the elevator speech, Mr. Coward. That's the elevator speech. And the point is, how do you translate that so that people who are reading an ad in the reminder, who are reading a social media essay, or whatever you want to call it, who are talking to their neighbors, or in a PTO meeting, et cetera, how do you translate those opposing forces that you've just eloquently described? How do we do that within the next 6 weeks so that people in the community know what the dilemmas are that we face and what they need to do in order to help us move forward?
In my opinion, they need to trust us. They have to trust, the community has to trust that the leadership of this community is making the decisions that are in the best interest of them. And if they don't trust us and they don't feel confident in our decision making, then we're going to be doing the same thing we've done the last, I mean, we had 3 referendums go in 3 different directions. If you ask somebody what Coventry wants, nobody knows. You vote no for a 0, you vote no for a 4, you vote no for a 2. Nobody knows what anybody wants, because nobody has any real understanding of what we're trying to do and where we're trying to move. And that has to come through trust. People need to trust our leadership. So I think we have to build trust, and the best way to do that is to be transparent and communicate and be consistent with our messaging.
And we on the council completely agree with you, and we've been trying to do things, as has already been mentioned, we've been bringing forth the different department heads to just talk not about the budget, but what do you do? So that people understand better what is happening. We're also interviewing every person who applies for a board and commission so that people know that we have an open process. We're trying to build that trust. We've got 6 weeks to do it. And so the question is, what do we need to do in order to get that elevator pitch that you had on the slide, plus your second elevator speech, thank you very much. What do we do to create that element of trust? How do we present the story and to make sure that we have a consistent story no matter what is the media in which we are using?
So the last thing I'll say, because I'm just one person, but we need a very, very thorough, comprehensive communication plan, but not one for the school and one for the town. We need one together. And if we have a good comprehensive communication plan that addresses people on social media and regular print media and any other platform people need to get their information, then I think we have a shot.
So how would you suggest that we develop this comprehensive partnership to produce this comprehensive communication plan?
Man, you are not letting me off the hook. I will.
No, I mean, you do like to talk, and you're eloquent, so why not?
I think we could do it. I have talked to Mr. Murray about this so much in the last few months because of what we're trying to do with building bond and building construction. And we've had this conversation on the building committee over and over again about how communication is the key to success here. And so I think we could come up with a comprehensive plan, but I don't think it should be the Don Coward plan. I think there should be a plan that has many people involved and many people contributing, some of which are on this screen and many of which who could be watching from home.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to draft something though if you want me to get it started.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'd be happy to draft something if you want me to get it started.
Well, I mean, you I think work with Mr. Levis, so I think, you'll have to have a conversation with him first.
He'll be having a conversation with me, I'm sure.
No. I just want to jump in is with that, and I made a comment, and I don't know if on a school committee side we explained it, but in fairness, we had leadership meetings, a couple of them where we talked about this and how we're going to work together and support one another, coming together because of our at least your experience, the committee's experience, and my experience, not too long ago. So we did talk about how we're going to work together, and I think that's crucial. And that was your suggestion, Dr. Dixon. I think we set the tone. How we work together sets the tone. I think the language that we use is paramount in terms of pushing a budget forward. Getting a budget to be bought into by your constituents. You're the elected officials. There's several of us on the screen that we're hired to do our job. Hopefully, the council will trust the judgment of the town manager and Ms. Mills, and hopefully the school committee. When I say trust the judgment, it's through dialogue and transparency. And so I think how we operate sets the tone, and I think that's crucial. You know, I still go back to the 3 votes, and there was a lot of variables around them. This is a whole different scenario that we're dealing with right now. So I think, you know, we need to work on that, you know, we can work on it with Mr. Marchant and Ms. Mills, but we need to get buy-in from everybody on this screen and to push it forward. To me, that's the only way that we'll get a budget to go. If not, you know, and I don't want to have to go down that path of what are we going to do? We're working hard to make sure that that budget will be sustainable, you know, and we'll talk more about that as we move forward, but we've used how we're using the COVID funds. And the last thing I'll say, we want to use COVID funds to purchase vehicles so we can offset $300,000 to $400,000 a year of our transportation costs, which will help us make this more sustainable moving forward. So we're not just throwing our hands up and say, save us. We're willing working partners in this, and we recognize the severity of the situation we're in. But I have hope. I have hope because of the people that are on this call, this meeting right now.
I do recognize the creativity of your team and thinking of ways by which you could use the COVID funds. I was pleasantly surprised to see how creative you were in developing a plan for the COVID funds that made a lot of sense academically and socially and emotionally for your students and your staff. Other questions from members of the council? Is that it? Mrs. Patno, any questions from members of your team?
I can ask them. If you would like to speak, just raise your hand and we will let you be heard. Mr. Murray.
You know me, I never miss an opportunity. No, I just want to express, I think we've heard a lot of good things tonight. And going to Council President Dixon's point, we hear you. I think you have to have trust in the school committee. We have common ground here, right? We're tasked with the same things that you're interested in. We want to have a balanced budget. We need financial accountability, but we also have an accountability to run a school system and enable and empower the administration to do the best job they can, to Don Coward's point. So we hear you, but it's also our job to go back and fight out the budget on our side and present a balanced budget. Councilman LeBlanc, you have a good point, even on the pavement question, some of the in the weeds stuff that I would expect that will get you some clarification on where Mr. Barton got his numbers in the backup, because that is important. I think that builds trust between us in providing that information. Enrollment numbers, it's a good question. We're talking about it on the building committee. Member Pearson has brought this up, and I don't refute it. You know, the question is what we do about it, how we manage it, what's our action plan moving forward? How do we use that data to drive process, right? So I just want to express that we're on shared ground here, right? So, you know, when you ask these questions, I think the important thing on all of our parts is to not get defensive, is to be accepting, take it as an inquiry of a partner, get the clarification, because these are the same exact questions we talk about communication that the community has at large. If you're asking, it's likely that somebody in the community has the same question. It's like a classroom, right? There's no stupid questions, because it's likely somebody in that class is just bashful to raise their hand. There's somebody in this audience tonight who doesn't want to raise their hand, but has that same question. So I think moving forward, we need to continue the dialogue. We heard a great number of things that I think establishes our value proposition, elevator pitch. But one suggestion on the communication side is we really should have a dialogue on whether that's a funded position or we're actually going to put money where our mouth is on the communication effort. Because we've talked about this in the building committee, that you can't just talk about a communication effort and then put it on all our individual people who work full-time jobs, many of us, to go out and post on social media. Somebody's got to lead the charge on this on both sides of the aisle, and whether that's one person or two individual people or an outside firm or whatever, we should probably have that dialogue, because this has come up a number of times over the past year, and it might be something we want to talk seriously about moving forward with budget and whether we're going to fund some sort of communication effort. So I want to thank the council. I think it was great dialogue tonight, and I'll leave it at that.
Any other comments? Okay, why don't we open it up for public comment? We have a number of people on the line. Are there any attendees who would like to make a comment? I don't see any hands raised. Any comments? Mrs. Patino, I don't see any comments for us.
Yeah, that looks like that's true, President Dixon. I do have one comment about the enrollment, because obviously I've been on school committee for a long time. And yes, we have lost about 1,000 students. The interesting thing for me is when you say that, you say, well, then you shouldn't have to spend as much money because you have that many less students. And so what I always look at, and I would encourage everybody to look at, is where we stand in our per pupil expenses. Since I've been on committee, we have always been in the bottom quartile or whatever, and we've never risen above that. So it's not like all of a sudden, you know, less students means that we have more money to spend because we're being overfunded. So it's a complicated equation, I think. And so I do know that it really is the per pupil cost. And just if you look at what other communities spend per pupil, we're not high. We're in the lower. I think we continue to be in the lower quarter or whatever, I believe.
Seventh
But I'm not.
lowest.
I'm sorry.
7th lowest according to the RIPEC report.
Yeah, and so that is based on enrollment. So regardless of, you know, the money trail, we're not spending a huge amount compared to other per student compared to some communities. We're in the lower category. So I just wanted to add that piece just to have some clarification, because when the public hears that we've lost, you know, 1,000 students, which is true, over the last 20 years that I've been on school committee, or 18 years, I always look at the per pupil cost, and we never seem to raise above where we are. So between cost of living, cost of everything, cost of whatever, we're still seem to be not funding our schools as much as some communities are for many reasons, but I just wanted to throw that out. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Mrs. Patino. Any other comments? Mr. LeBlanc?
Just to follow up on Mrs. Patino's commentary, if you take the local appropriation and you use the RIDE reports for enrollment, for FY 2011, the amount per student was 7,800, and then if you use FY 2021, the amount per student is 10,700. So it has gone up pretty considerably per student, but I think Member Shockley did state that she is looking at something that shows that we are 7th lowest, but just wanted to call that out.
Thank you. Mr. Coward?
Just to add to that, and this is a little anecdotal, but I'm sure we could get the numbers behind it. When I first came on to the district and I was the principal at Washington Oak in 13-14, we were close to, well, we're just over 700 kids at that school, and we had 5 classrooms at each grade level, and now there's 4 at each grade level. And so that's just one place where, you know, 5 classrooms, 6 classrooms were eliminated, and there were other classrooms that we've closed across the district. So I think if you look at, you know, I think the per pupil number is important to look at. The other thing I would look at is maybe some of the staffing, because I know we've reduced in a number of places. And if you go back to the presentation, some of the positions that we're looking to put back in are numbers or positions that were eliminated back then that we found really had an impact on student learning and they need to be reinstated.
Thank you. I believe that there are many positives that have come out of the Coventry Public Schools over the past few years. And the idea is to find those positives, raise them up so that people become more aware in the community of the good things that are happening. Any other questions? All right, Mrs. Patno, would you please close your meeting?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Could we have a motion to adjourn? I have 9:30. Mr. Florio, you're on mute. I see your lips moving.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to adjourn the meeting for the school committee at 9:30 a.m.
Second the
Um,
motion.
And I think we can just call for a raised hand on that. So if you agree to that, just raise your hand. And it looks like I have 5 votes. So motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Members of the council, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. Ludwig.
I'll
May I-
second it.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Roll call vote, please raise your hand if you approve of us adjourning for the evening. Thank you very much. The motion is approved. Good night, everyone, and I think we'll all see each other again next week. Is that correct? We have public hearings for the budgets. Good.
Good night.
See you
Good
soon. Good
Good
night,
night.
everyone.
Everyone, thank you
Good night.
all.